Hello and welcome to another edition of Cryptowriter with me, Jillian Godsil, where we look at the most interesting, insightful and exciting people in this space. And today I'm delighted to welcome as my guest Oliver Gale, who is the co-founder of Panther Protocol and lots more besides. Welcome to the show, Oliver.
Thank you very much, Jillian. Pleasure to be here.
Well, thank you indeed. And I know you're a busy man. Thank you for taking your time out. So we're going to jump right in, right? You are already a groundbreaker when it comes to central bank digital currencies, CBDCs. So how do you view the convergence of crypto and fiat currencies?
Good question. Well, fiat cryptocurrencies represented from inception the opportunity to build a permissionless, censorship-resistant, transparent, accountable, and immutable database. And on that database, of course, the first major use case, has been that of monetary instruments. And so if you're a believer in the power of these public blockchain technologies, then in an extrapolation, and this is what Satoshi Nakamoto's white paper postulated and what this multi-trillion-dollar industry is based on. But an extrapolation would lead one to believe that the future of currency will not be that of currencies issued by central authorities, because central authorities, as it comes to any rise and fall of empires and their currencies over time, have always inflated their currencies away, usually to finance their militaries. And so inflation tends to precede the collapse of an empire. And so when you look at that end state of our markets will be dominated by cryptocurrencies and not fiat currencies, there has to be a transition period. And central bank digital currencies fit in that window to enable government issued monies to inherit the properties of blockchain technologies, which, these peer-to-peer, very useful systems. So there is going to be this intervening period, and it was that thought process that led us to push and invent ultimately the first central bank digital currency.
And do you think there's a role, or what will the role be of centralized entities going forward? Will they just be eroded over time, or will there be a land grab? What will happen?
Central authorities can be extremely efficient and in many different ways: coordination, information sharing, etc. They play an important role. We ourselves, in some sense, are individuals, and in others, we're part of a collective, depending on how you view it. But central authorities themselves play an important function. And the nature of every interaction between parties in an economy should be that of a transaction. And so the transactions between central authorities and individuals will continue. What cryptocurrencies, blockchain technologies do, in some cases, they make the central authority unnecessary. In other cases, they increase the self-sovereignty of the individual and then improve the negotiating position with those authorities for whatever the transaction is. So it might be fairer currencies, fairer banking, better healthcare, more accessible energy, and so forth. And so it's this leveling of the playing field to the empowerment of the collective versus the central authorities, but it's not necessarily the elimination of central authorities.
You've been speaking a little bit now, and people in this sector obviously are very pro crypto. What are the downsides to crypto in your estimation?
I think it's often forgotten that a blockchain at its core was solving the Byzantine general's problem, which is an adversarial game theoretic situation where you have these coordination and trust issues. So for me, whenever I think of should we apply blockchain technology to a use case, I ask myself, is the environment adversarial? Is there an incentive from one party to be dishonest with the other party? And if that is the case, then there's a cost-benefit analysis of using blockchain technology. The cost is the inefficiency caused through the consensus building process, and the benefit of course, is that you have a level of assurance over the honesty of the actors using crypto economic incentives. So that's the core, that's the first principles of usage of blockchain. So the downside is, if you introduce blockchain technology where there's really no adversarial market, you're just imposing friction on your marketplace, and it's expensive. So it's something that's done often, but that's it boiled down to a nutshell.
That's the best explanation of why you should or shouldn't put in blockchain into a process. Adversarial and friction. You don't want to put in the friction unless there's a need. That's very clever. Wow. I love learning things. So tell me some more things now. So privacy. Why is privacy so important in society? I know it's a big question.
Yeah.
Big question.
So, I mean, I've always been a privacy advocate because I've always been an advocate of the self-sovereignty of the individual. And of course, I've become involved in a privacy project now heavily, and it's raised many philosophical, ethical, moral, and practical questions. And the more I learn on the subject and its intricacies, the more I realize it's highly nuanced. And in fact, the scope of the importance of privacy is all encompassing in a digital economy. Without privacy, you essentially do not have exclusive ownership of your information. The information has zero marginal cost of reproduction, and so will propagate. And really, in that sense, you lose your right to negotiate with your scarce asset ultimately, which is your data. So in whatever the context is, in a digital economy, without having the option for privacy, you have really exposed yourself to surveillance by those with the resources to survey you, which generally speaking will be a skewed entity distribution, in that those with more power are better able to survey, are better able to accumulate and interpret your information and leverage it for whatever their ends are. And so your fundamental human right in that regard has been undermined, and so that's sanctified for good reason. So that is the in my mind, privacy kind of is the root of democracy and freedom.
So how do you translate that then into financial affairs? Because people don't often make that jump. I mean, they recognize you close the bathroom door, but then financial affairs, how do you sort of parlay that into sense?
So finance is a heavily regulated industry, if you will. And the finance industry, for good reason, has anti-money laundering and counter-terrorist financing regulations to limit, and in an effort to limit and prohibit bad actors from abusing the system. Cryptocurrencies, on the other hand, offer a public permissionless financial system, which ultimately, so now you have two forces which to some degree find themselves in opposition, but it doesn't mean that they can't be complementary to one another. And in fact, in many use cases, they already are. So if you look at the history of something like Bitcoin, regulators incorrectly spent the last 10 years claiming that Bitcoin was a tool for money laundering and a danger to society. And it seems that a decade later, the penny is dropped, and they recognize that actually these ledgers are pseudonymous, which is, there's a distinction to be made. Anonymity means you're acting and nobody can identify who you are. Pseudonymity means that you're acting in a way behind an alias. And in the crypto space, with enough statistical information, you can often infer who the actor is. And given that the ledgers are immutable, it's a matter of building a transaction history on this forever database, and then using some statistical means to infer who the actor is. So in fact, that is now used widely in that statistical tooling is used widely in the crypto industry in order to enforce anti-money laundering compliance regulations. Now, that's the application, and we've talked about the why, but if you really look at the picture, again, taking a step back, the nature of the financial services are that they offer some benefit to the citizen. And the citizen is prepared to make some compromise or disclosure in order to access a service which is to their benefit. And that's the nature, or should be the nature, of all commerce. So when you're engaging with a regulated financial institution who is rightly regulated, and you are an individual who is rightly sovereign as the individual, and you rightly own your own information, there needs to be a desire on your part to participate in the financial system. And on the other side, compromises that have to be made in order to access the services. And what that looks like is confidential disclosure, which is where a private individual makes the decision to disclose information to a party or a group of parties of their own volition in order to enable transactions. And so confidential disclosure is what is the current state of affairs in the financial system which we live in. Mm-hmm. And it is the state of affairs which should continue in the digital economy, where if an individual wants to participate, and let's make it very simple use case, you want to use a MasterCard, you have to do your KYCDD. If you don't want to be a part of the system, that's your sovereign choice to do so, but then you forego many of the benefits. And so the net impact is that financial services become more efficient and effective and create a greater value proposition for the user, and the user in turn is prepared to share their information, and B, go through the hurdles and the costs of becoming a user of the platform. I hope that wasn't too
No, it's about negotiation, which is very important with your data. But also what you were describing there is, for example, towards the end, you said about how if a person wants to use a MasterCard, they have to voluntarily give up information, that confidential disclosure. In cryptocurrencies, of course, it's pseudonymous. So with enough information, you can gather out who that person is. And it's very hard to hide. And I say hide, but just not hide, shield perhaps what it is you're doing in right terms, not in wrong terms. So your new business, the Panther Protocol, how does that tackle that difficulty?
So in order to have a negotiation, you have to start by leveling the playing field. And leveling the playing field for information involves restoring the information asymmetry between the owner of the data and the party that wishes to consume the data. And so what Panther does is it enables native assets issued on various blockchains to become private assets by wrapping them as a zero asset, which is, they're called zero assets because we use zero knowledge proofs to create a token on the native blockchain. And that asset from henceforth is one-to-one backed by the collateral, which is its underlying instrument. So it's always fully reserved. And the asset, when it's transferred on chain, breaks the link between sender and receiver, so that when you're looking at the transaction graph of all of these transactions being stored on this public immutable ledger, you're not able to associate senders and receivers. And so what that does is it makes it more difficult to statistically analyze the data and de-anonymize the individual or the entity. And so it might be an individual that doesn't wish to disclose their purchase at the pharmacy. It might be a large institution not wishing to disclose the trading history of all of its users in accordance with GDPR compliance. It might be a private hedge fund not wishing to disclose the source of their alpha in the market. The use cases for privacy are broad. And in some cases, as is, again, is our right, the use case for privacy is nothing more than because I want to be private, because I don't want to be public. And so, again, the financial system today engages in confidential disclosure. Blockchains, public blockchains, do not. They engage in mandatory, pseudonymous disclosure to the world. And there are many willing users of that information to achieve, again, the ends of the party who is surveying the blockchain transaction history. And so we live in a dangerous time in that if we don't really stand up for our rights to privacy, we might find ourselves in a world where we're not entitled to privacy. And you only need to read 1984, books like Brave New World to see what the extrapolation by the nameless and the faceless is towards the structure and control of our society. And you only have to look to places like China to see how these systems pan out in practice with the power of the information age, the internet, big data, machine learning technology, etc. So to me, this mission is one which is about ensuring that we live in a free world, ensuring that we live in a world where our voices are heard, ironically, because privacy is about actually what you don't communicate at the start. But again, you must start with being able to not disclose in order to have any say in the conversation.
It's quite profound, but it actually makes sense. We don't think about it until we nearly lose it. And as someone said to me the other day, another good example is voting. We don't go around, you can if you want to, but that voting being a secret vote is a primary cornerstone of democracy. So why do we have to show everything? And it's clever because I think the way that the world is speaking or has been speaking in the last 10 years, it's put the onus like privacy is like a bad thing, a dirty thing, where it's a natural thing. We're not private.
Yeah. Here's an interesting question. How do you think Hitler's Nazi Germany would have responded to a public voting system? How do you think the votes would have gone down in that order? Yeah. Right? Like it seems far away, but that actually wasn't that long ago.
Well, even I look across the water at the American presidency and the denial of the voting system. And you deny. Where do you believe?
Well, here's the irony of this, right? The irony of the voting system and that farce which took place during the elections was that, and I don't understand the reasons for maintaining these archaic systems. On the one hand, you have privacy of the voting process, which is fine. But on the other hand, you don't have accountability. And this is the beauty of blockchain technology and things like zero knowledge proofs, is that you can have the best of both worlds. You can have immutable, mathematically assured privacy and disclosure and accuracy. There would be no question of was the vote rigged. You use a zero knowledge proof to disclose that with mathematical certainty, in fact, the vote was not rigged. And at the same time, you do not have to shuffle through individuals' ballot sheets and redact their names and so on and so forth. So, this is the huge, if you don't pay attention, if you are a regulator and you don't pay attention, to what's happening in the macro geopolitical landscape and the emergence of the digital economy, you're going to make poor decisions. What blockchain technology represents is the opportunity to have the assurances of irrefutable evidence whilst also having the assurances of irrefutable privacy. And that levels the playing field for us to engage in commerce in the middle, which is the goal of a capitalist society, is for the free market to function. So, there are two sides to that coin, and cryptography solves both of them as it relates to something like an election.
So last question for you, parting words. We're in the middle of a bull run at the moment. What do you think? We're now in May 4th. What do you think is going to continue? Are we on this pathway? What view do you have of the world?
Well, how far out are we zooming?
Well,
if we zoom right out, I started by saying that cryptocurrencies are going to supplant fiat currencies as the dominant form of payment, and particularly in cross-border use cases in these adversarial markets, of which national borders represent a really good use case for adversarial conditions in a global economy. So zoom out, I think Bitcoin as the world's most effective store of value using proof of work is a genius system, of course, and underrated by many new entrants to the market who are looking at the derivatives that are built on these consensus mechanisms and not recognizing the genius of energy security in a world where the cheapest form of energy is now solar, but it wasn't a decade ago. But all you had to do was look at the trends to recognize that that was going to happen. And so decriers of things like Bitcoin on the basis of energy wastefulness don't recognize that, unlike a combustion vehicle, which runs on fossil fuels, a Bitcoin miner has what you call a plug. And the plug is where you source your power, and the electricity and the source of the electricity, of course, is driven in some cases, many cases for mining in particular, by hydro and coal. But the usage of coal is diminishing because things like solar energy are becoming more efficient to deploy. So from an energy perspective, you look at Bitcoin as a store of value, and it's an incredible instrument. If you look at the market cap of gold, and you look at the potential use case as a means of payment, Bitcoin has the opportunity to be worth 100 times more than it's worth today in the long run. In the short run, if you're looking at human psychology and cycles, it's interesting. We may be coming to the final third of this bull run. On the other hand, unprecedented quantitative easing, a weak dollar,
pandemic, a world
COVID-19 driven economy. But by COVID-19 is interesting because I actually think the elimination of the commute and the elimination of work-life separation has actually made a more productive digital citizen. I have a feeling that that's actually driving our economy out of the recession. And then you look at things like Ethereum, which have phenomenal network effects as well. And I think that, we're in an interesting space in terms of this cycle, but it is, it's not inconceivable that we see a paradigm shift in 2021, 2022 as blockchains, which are ready for global commercial use cases, take center stage. So, just depends on the time frame we're looking at.
Of course, it mightn't even be a topic of conversation. Do we talk about our stocks and shares? Unless there's a really major thing happening. Not, I don't have any, but in theory I might have. So you're right. It becomes redundant. It is what it is, and it segues into the mainstream. And we'll be having this. We'll look back on these interviews. We'll say, what a strange thing. They were talking about money. Why were they talking about money, crypto in that way? So that's kind of interesting. Going back to Panther Protocol, where's the future? What's happening there with Panther? What are you doing?
Well, we're just closing out a very extended private sale process, in which we have really made sure that we get a broad dispersion of strategic partners. We've got a fantastic team of about 20 working on new game theoretic conditions for creating efficient privacy in the market. Panther itself is in talks with institutions about confidential disclosure. Panther is building both the tools to give the individual unstoppable privacy and concurrently give the institution an easy way to enter into that transaction with the user, whereby the user becomes maintains their privacy to the rest of the world, but actually engages in a disclosure process, which is irrefutable, as mentioned prior, cryptographically with the institution. So that's actually high up on the institution's strategic roadmap for the adoption and usage of cryptocurrencies. You cannot have a BlackRock using a public chain where all of their customers are de-anonymized by a competitor within national borders or across national borders. So those discussions are going really well. And protocol itself, we're evaluating a public sale now, which will take place in July or August. Mainnet is slated for Q3 of this year for V1. And it's been all systems go for a while now, and that will continue.
Perfect. If people want to find you, where's the best place to find you and Panther?
Come to our Telegram channel, Panther Protocol. We have an open community there. Panther's on Twitter as well and active on Twitter. I myself can be found on Twitter, original Oli, OLII. And yeah, join the conversation. This is a mission for anyone who cares about their fundamental freedoms. And it's a protocol. So it's not owned by us. We're just starting it. And we want everyone.
And it's unstoppable. It's unstoppable.
Yes, it is.
Brilliant. Thank you so much indeed for your time today. That's brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you, Jillian.